You were talking about the tendency people have due to Plato brain
Plato brain.
To associate the soul with identity. And we've talked about this before. Did an episode called "Who Stole the Soul?" about the soul, where we talked about
Yes.
souls. And so, of course, tonight we're talking about the bodily resurrection, so we're going to be talking more about bodies, but we need to revisit the distinction here a little bit, because a lot of us have had this Plato idea fed into us that yourself, who you are, the you, is your soul, and your body is a husk or a vehicle or something your soul uses to move around. That you're the ghost in the machine, as it were.
We're all just big mechs.
Yeah, I would have a much cooler machine. Voltron. And so all of that is Plato. That is not Christianity. That is not the Hebrew Scriptures. That's not what a soul is. So as we've talked about before, soul, definition in Hebrew, literally means life. Right? It means life. So the soul is the life of an animate. That's where the word animate comes from, anima, which means soul in Latin. Of an animate creature. And the soul is the life of a human. The soul is the life of the human body. It is what makes the human body alive. Okay, so it is not the self. It is not the inner person. It is not the person, right? In any sense. It is that element of life that makes your body alive, right? Because your body is made up of otherwise inert elements and compounds, right? It's a big pile of chemicals, right, that is made alive by something, and that something is the soul. Right?
What was the quip in that one episode from, was it the first season of Next Generation? Ugly bags of mostly water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's what animates, literally, right, the body. But all human souls are essentially the same.
Oh man, you're gonna offend a whole bunch of people with that one.
Well, there you go. That's the soul as such. A human soul as such is a human soul. Right. The distinctives of identity do not apply to a human soul, meaning I'm not alive in a different sense than Father Andrew.
Right.
Right. The animating principle of my body is not different than the animating principle of his body or any of our listeners' bodies. Right. It is different than the animating principle of animal bodies. Right. That's why I said all human souls are essentially the same. Right. But it is not different from human person to human person. Right. And when we say that physical death, the physical death of anything really, but including a human, is the separation of the soul from the body, we're not talking about like two planks that have been nailed together, right? Or like your soul is like your emotions and your feelings, whatever those are, and your thoughts and your mind, and then your body is just like tissue. We're talking about the life leaving your body. Your body is still there, right? Now it's no longer alive. And pretty much immediately after the life leaves your body, all those chemical processes stop, and those elements and compounds start to break down into inanimate matter.
Yeah.
Right. That's what happens. So, soul being separated from the body, though we've jargonized it a little, is a very little literal description for what happens when you watch something die. You watch the life leave it. Physically, materially, everything that was there before is still there now, but it is no longer alive. Right? That thing that is now gone, that life that is now gone, is the thing that we call the soul. Okay? So this is obviously going to be important when we come around eventually. Guess what? It's going to be the third half to the bodily resurrection, right? Which is going to involve the soul coming back into the body, right? That being restored. But the soul itself has nothing of identity. And you can see this. There are obvious examples where you can see this, right? Plato and lots of other pagan folks in different parts of the world believe in sort of direct reincarnation. So, something dies, that soul departs from the body because they're looking at the soul as a thing, and then it gets another body, right? But even for the completely Plato-brained person who believes in reincarnation, that new body, that new person, right, is not the same person as the old person.
Yeah.
There's not a persistence of self.
Right. There's clearly some kind of major alteration, at the very least, within that paradigm.
So they can believe it's the same soul, it's the same life that passed from one person to another, but the self clearly didn't, right? They don't have the memories, they don't have the same personality, they might be in a different part of the world, right? Everything may be different, right? So this is part of the idea of this. Even if you believe in reincarnation and that kind of thing, the soul isn't the self, right? So then we have to move now to the body, right? So if your soul isn't yourself, then that means yourself, your identity, who you are. If it doesn't have anything to do with your soul, because your soul is just like every other human's, right? Then that means that it has something to do with your body. Right? It has something to do with the other part of that equation. And this, again, is something that we as humans instinctively recognize. Especially about other humans, but not just about other humans. We recognize that when a person dies and we're looking at their body, that is still them, right? People don't watch a loved one die and then just turn around and shrug and go, okay, well, they're gone.
Or,
and just leave the body where it lays.
Like an example that, well, I have children, I have minor children, the phrase, he hit me. What are you going to say? He didn't hit you. He hit the fleshly wrapper that the real you is inside, or is controlling
I was just swinging my arms and she walked into them.
That's right. No, people know if you get hit, you hit me.
Yeah.
And just to double down, and it's you that hit me, not the shell, not your mech that hit my mech,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We would never look at someone who just died and say, oh, their body died.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even like, think about all the things in law as well, in which the body is very much assumed to be the person. Imagine trying to argue in front of a judge. Oh, I didn't shoot him. I just shot his fleshly form,
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. That's just logical. And this isn't just based on some kind of developed philosophy of the body that we now have in the modern era, right? And we know this because You can go all the way back to the Neolithic period, as we're wont to do on this show, especially in the first half. You can go to Çatalhöyük. You can go to these earliest sites of human civilization on Earth that we've discovered. And you find, guess what? They're burying their dead. They're not abandoning the bodies of their loved ones. They're not getting rid of them. They're not burning them. They're burying them. And not only were they burying them in these earliest settlements, a family would bury their departed loved ones in the floor of their house. They would keep those bodies near them and with them. Right? Which shows that even back then, before a word of the Bible was written, before, right, God revealed himself to Abraham, before any of that, right, before there was any promise of a bodily resurrection recorded in Scripture, people recognized instinctually, right, that the body of their departed loved one was still their loved one, was still that person. That body was not just the person while they were alive, as Father Andrews pointed out, but even after they're dead, it continues to be them. Even when the soul is gone, the life is gone, that's still them.
Yeah.
Right? It isn't that them packed up and left, and this is their old house. Right? It's different. So things like cremation, things like Zoroastrian burial, these are all practices that develop in certain specific pagan cultures, mostly after the Axial Age, meaning mostly circa 500 BC and later. And those practices, as opposed to burial, are practices that are based in sort of developed philosophies and theologies that say that the body is no longer the person, or that the body is worthless, or in Plato's case, the body is the prison house of the soul.
Yeah.
Right. It's when you get developed ideas like that that bodies start being disposed of. But that's not the instinctual human practice that we see from the very beginning, even before history was being recorded.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to note, right? Like, for instance, the age as you're talking about, right? That's kind of the development of Plato brain period, right?
Yes.
But if you look at like among the Greeks, if you look at the stories that they're all still telling, read the Iliad, read the Odyssey, what exactly happens to a person's body has a huge impact on their experience of, pagan Greek afterlife. Right. Has a huge impact. Like, whether the person is buried or not is a big question in those stories. So they still retain that idea, and they're at least telling stories that have that in it, even as they're starting to develop some of these dualistic approaches to the body.
Yeah. So for folks who don't know, since I use the term axial age, and I don't know if I've referred to it before on the show, that's used to refer to the period of time in the mid first millennium BC when you get Buddhism first showing up in the East, you get Platonic philosophy showing up in Greece, Greek philosophy showing up in Greece, starting with the pre-Socratics. You have the classical Hebrew prophets in the Middle East. So that's used as a way of generalizing about that period of religious and philosophical self-awareness in the first millennium BC, which we don't have written records of before that. That's not to say all those phenomena are the same or even related, right? It's just that at that time in history, probably based on the progress of technology, writing, etc., various cultures reach a higher point of self-reflection.
Yeah. They're not just doing things. They're talking about and writing about and philosophizing about the stuff that they do.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Because when humans are hunting and gathering, that doesn't leave a lot of time to think about, what does it all mean? Um,
Yeah.
and same thing with, subsistence farming to try to keep your family alive. You have to reach a certain level of social advancement, and then you can have people start to think, what is the correct way to structure a society? Why is ours structured the way it is, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Why do these things happen, right? We offered sacrifices to the gods and these bad things still happened. Why, right? All those kinds of thoughts require a certain level of societal development. And several cultures reach that level of development in different parts of the world in the middle of the first millennium BC. So that's what I was talking about when I say previous to that, when we see burials and religious phenomena, those tend to be religious phenomena that are sort of instinctual and built into humanity at some level.
Yeah.
Right. So sacrificial ritual, everyone does all over the world in similar ways. Right. Before that, the offering of incense, burying the dead. There are these sort of therefore we can say are kind of built in some sense into what it is to be human. Once you get to that period where that reflection starts to happen, you start getting diverging sort of philosophical viewpoints about these things. Because now it's not just a question of what's instinctual to humanity and how humanity is built, but people can build and create things and create ideologies for various reasons, et cetera, et cetera. But so what does it mean, or what follows from us saying that, okay, your identity is not related to your soul, your identity is related to your body, right? That yourself is a physical self that exists in the world, right? This has some drastic effects in how we have to rethink a whole bunch of things.
Yeah. Although,
yeah,
I was going to say, it's interesting, right? As I'm pondering this again, like the fact that I'm a body in the world is actually self-evident. It requires a whole stack of thinking that that's not true in order for me to conceive of myself in some other way.
right. But we've been fed that stack.
Yeah. Again, he hit me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But we've been taught, right, this, oh no, the inner me, the, who I am inside that no one knows. We've all been taught to be Morrissey, and it's weird. Right. And speaking of Morrissey, as we were, what the part of what this means is that our identity, right, who we are, right, if our self is related to our body, who I am is external to me, not internal. Right? It's not some internal set of internal processes. Right. I have this person who I am deep down inside who's longing to get out, but no, I'm trapped. Right. That's not really who I am.
Yeah. With, and we don't need to go there, but we'll just say with massive implications for a lot of the big debates of our time.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
That's not right. But it's who I am. It's the body that I am in the world. Right. That's who I am. That means external to me. External. So there is a process that all humans go through in adolescence, right? For some of us, it never ends. But that process, and this is a very modern process because adolescence is a very modern concept, right? For most of human history and in much of the world today, 13 years old is an adult. And that's when you get married off in an arranged marriage and start having kids. And you're an adult now. So there is no adolescence. But our modern cultures in the West have created this thing, adolescence, this period where humans are sexually mature, but are not considered adults by society. This sort of 5-year holding pattern, 4 or 5 year holding pattern. And we wonder why there's all these problems.
At least. At least 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And having created that, right, because people aren't sort of let out into the world to become adults as bodies, as people in the world, they're not allowed to sort of become themselves. They tend to spend a lot of time trying to figure out who they are. And what they quickly realized is that, especially when they were small children, who they were was an extension of their parents, their family in general, right? And so they try to define who they are as an individual over against their parents, over against their family, over against whatever religious tradition they were brought up in, over against, right? And so they sort of push back on all of those things. So they say, I'm not that, and not that, and not that, and not that, and not that. And so you strip all those things away. Strip away all those relationships, familial relationships, social relationships, cultural relationships, community relationships. Rip all those away. What do you have left? Nothing. You have nothing left. You don't find some inner soul that has an identity inside of you. You find a big hole. Right? You find nothing. And that's why adolescents who go down this road end up being nihilists for at least a couple years. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's also like, maybe to a lesser extent, although sometimes to a great extent, during the height of the pandemic, when a lot of relationships were significantly strained or reduced, big uptick in mental health issues and suicide, because what it is that defines who we are was muted.
Right. All these things are taken away. There's no identity there. So that's sort of the negative way of seeing it. But the positive way of seeing it is that my identity is a whole series of nested, stacked up relationships. Right? My relationships to my family members, my relationships to my community and the different communities that I'm a part of, my relationships with various movements and thoughts and things that are going on in society, which we've defined as spirits. We've done an episode on what spirits are. You can look at that, right? The sort of spirits that move me and that I participate in for good or for evil, right? And of course, my relationship with God, right? These relationships all taken together, right? You stack them all up, each one of those pieces. And what you get at the end of the stack, when you look at the whole stack, that's my identity. That's who Father Stephen DeYoung is. Right? If you want a real picture of who Father Stephen DeYoung is, you have to have all the pieces. The more pieces you have, the more full of a picture you have. Right? I'm the pastor of a parish. I'm an Orthodox priest. I've got a PhD in a particular subject, and I did my research on a particular topic. I'm working on another one, right? All of these things, right? Here's where I stand on various issues, right? Here are the things I'm involved in. Here are the hobbies I have. Here are the things I enjoy. I'm a husband to my wife, right? I'm an uncle to my nephew. It's on and on and on and on and on and on and on, right? The more of those you pile up, the more of those you're aware of, the more complete a picture you have of who I am. And again, our culture has taught us, right, to look at that whole pile of things and say, okay, but there's this but.
Yeah,
that our
I
culture
must
tells
be
us to throw in.
Some kind of unique, special creature that is not definable by any of those quote unquote labels.
Yes, I am a beautiful and unique snowflake. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Right. That's the positive way, right? I won't do the, we're all mulching in the same compost heap joke, but right. But that but is fake. It's false. Right. It's trying to rattle and shake your sense of identity. Right? You may wonder, why would our culture do that? Right? What is it about our culture that would try to make it so that you are insecure in your identity?
Yeah, it's to give us something else.
There are a number of reasons, right? One of them is to sell you things.
Yes.
Right? Identity is now something you express by how you dress. So you have to buy things to wear, and what kind of car you drive, and what kind of how you present yourself, right?
Which accounts you follow on Twitter.
Yes. You're supposed to not see yourself as this interlocking web that's a given, that's an objective thing, right? And find fulfillment and purpose in all of those relationships and all of those roles. No, you're supposed to craft an identity for yourself.
Yeah. Which is expensive and exhausting.
Yes, because no matter how much of it you do, you're always aware that you're cosplaying and it's not real. Right? It's not real. And if it goes far enough, you can ruin all the relationships that would have given you identity and meaning, that would have given you a sense of who you are. Because you've been chasing after these other superficial things. But someone else has been making money off of you while that's been happening. Someone else has been exploiting you. Right? People won't just do this to you to sell you things either. Right? People will do this to exploit you sexually, especially young people. People will do that, but they're always exploiting you. They're always trying to cast doubt on your confidence in who you are and what your purpose is and where you should derive meaning in your life, because they want to take something from you. Not because they want to give you a renewed sense of purpose.
And that's why The Matrix worked as a concept for a movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So the flip side of that is, right, when we re-embed ourselves in those relationships and in that identity, and we accept it and we embrace it, and we accept and embrace the purpose and the meaning that gives us, we become increasingly impervious to that kind of stuff. Right. We don't get suckered in by that kind of thing.
Yeah, people who have healthy in-person relationships are much less likely to feel lost and stressed out by everything that's going on in quote unquote the world.
Yeah. So another important piece here in our first half is that another piece of this external identity is our actions, because our actions are external to us. Right? We act in the world. Right? We act in the world. And so our actions in the world are part of what define who we are. Right? They're part and parcel of those relationships, really, honestly. Right? Our actual relationship to God is not made up of feelings we might have about God or feelings that we interpret as being from God at various points in our life, right? The scriptures are very clear. Our relationship with God, right, is made up of our actions.
Is that works righteousness against Father Stephen?
Yes. Sorry.
I mean, I need to tally at some point just so I have the number on hand of how many times the scripture associates loving God with keeping his commandments.
Yes.
But even if there weren't a bunch of times, which there totally is, Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Right. I mean, you can't get clearer than that.
Yeah.
You can't tell me there's some other passage of scripture that's clearer than that you're going to use to reinterpret that one. Right? That dog don't hunt. Right? If you love Christ, you'll keep his commandments. Keeping his commandments is what love is.
Yeah.
Right? My love for my wife is not a feeling I have sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this, John 3:16, right? Probably the best known Bible verse, at least in the English speaking world, I think is misunderstood a lot, where it begins, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. The so there in English is not like he loved us so much, right? It's not an emphatic. And I looked this up just to make sure I was right about this. I can't remember the exact word it is in Greek, but the Greek, it means in this manner. Yeah. For God in this manner, loved the world, that he gave his only begotten son. That even when the love of God is being described by the scriptures, it's by what God does.
Yes. Love is an action of God. Yes. My love for my wife is actions. Okay. My love for my wife is not a feeling I have, right? It's not warm fuzzies, right? Those things are nice. If you've got feelings, enjoy them.
Like Boston said, it's more than a feeling.
But me loving my wife is when I get up before her, I do a bunch of the things I know she's going to want me to do without her having to ask me to do them, that make her life easier. That is loving my wife. It has nothing to do with feelings. It has nothing to do with words. Right? It's what I do. Right? And that's, there are other very clear passages of the New Testament. The person who says he loves God and hates his brother is a liar.
Yeah.
You don't get clearer than that. Right? This is the whole concept of hypocrisy, which is all through the prophets and all through Christ's criticism of the Pharisees. Right? What you say is great, but what you do isn't. And what you do is what's real. Right? What you would write down if I gave you a test as the right answer is not important. What you say is not important. What you claim you think or believe is not important. What you do is important, because what you do reflects what you actually believe and actually think and actually value, right? And actually think is important. That is going to naturally express itself in actions, which again, all through the New Testament, this is why our actions, our works are always described as fruit. Fruit of a tree. A bad tree can't bring forth good fruit, and a good tree won't bring forth bad fruit. Right? The fruit reveals what's inside of us. Right? Because of that. Totally clear in Scripture. No way around it. Right? And so our actions are, right, our identity.